Hello, I'm Locke Meredith. I'd like to invite you to join me on the next Legal Lines. I have Gary Beard. He's a state representative. Gary's going to talk to us about how you pass a bill through the legislature. He's also going to talk to us about the largest budget in the history of the state of Louisiana, and also some bills he's very proud of authoring and sponsoring. So join us on the next Legal Lines with Gary Beard.
Cox Communications is homegrown with local programming for you. Whether it's local sports, local arts and education, local news and weather, local faith and worship, or local stations with the best in entertainment, Cox Communications brings it all home to you. It's homegrown programming with roots, only on cable, only on Cox.
Welcome to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith, and I'm pleased to have on the show Gary Beard. He is a state representative. Gary, thanks so much for being on the show. I know it's legislature's meeting right now.
We're currently in session. A little break.
Last day of it, huh?
Last day, and waiting for all the bills to come back out of conference committee. By rule, everything had to be finished by yesterday, and so we're now waiting for everything to go into a conference committee reports.
Explain the process to folks.
Let me do that, because
I think folks don't. They just think a rep puts up a bill or a senator puts up a bill. Everybody votes on it. It's a done deal.
It's a little more complicated.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we even tried to put a bill in in fact, yesterday, this session, to change some of the process to make it more. May have more public awareness, have more sunshine on what's going on.
I was reading that, and kind of the argument against doing it is, I think, term limits and let the other guys who are coming in do it, or what's the deal?
Yeah, they're saying that, well, since everyone's leaving, let the new guys come in and figure it out for themselves.
Of course, you guys have been there, and so you know the process. Very interesting.
Yeah, and the way that it normally would work, for example, take one of my bills. We take a taxation bill that I've had to reduce taxes.
Praise you.
I take that and I put it through, and it goes into Ways and Means Committee. Ways and Means Committee normally will hear the bill. They'll vote it up or down. For example, I had a marriage tax credit in other words, if you were married for more than 5 years, you begin getting a tax credit for the length of time that you're married.
Interesting, because it's more.
It benefits our society.
Right.
It helps
beneficial
our families.
to the society.
So give a tax credit, because remember, years ago it used to be a penalty.
That's right.
You would be better off living together as singles rather than being married.
Boy, has that worked.
We tried to switch that around. Well, they listened to the bill and they deferred it. They went to what they call the bone pile.
So it dies.
It dies. It never goes any further than that. I had other bills to be able to provide tax incentives for research for stem cell research, legitimate, good stem cell research, non-embryonic.
Right.
Okay, so adult stem cell research. Never got a hearing. So it never even got to committee. It never even had a hearing.
And the person in charge of whether it gets in front of the committee, I guess, is the chairman?
The chairman of the committee makes a decision as whether...
Well, that's a lot of power, isn't it?
Tremendous amount of power. So
is it abused? I guess it sure sounds like it can be.
In this particular case, that research was never heard.
Well, why wouldn't it be made up of more than one person?
Well, each committee has one head, one boss, and that committee chairman is appointed by the Speaker of the House, who of course is effectively,
pulling all the strings, kind of.
Truthfully and effectively appointed, if you will, by the governor. It's voted on by the House members, but the governor has a lot of sway on who the president of the Senate is and who the Speaker of the House would be. And they appoint chairmen of all the committees. But,
wow.
But a typical bill would get hung up in committee, never even had a hearing. If it did have a hearing, it goes from that committee. If it's voted up, it goes to the floor of the House. The floor of the House can make a change, just like the committee can, and vote on it, up or down. If it's voted up, it goes to the Senate committee.
And they do the exact same thing.
Exact same thing. Now, when it comes back to the House, the author of the bill, in this case me, I would take the bill, I would look at it, and I would say, I like what the Senate has done. They've really improved upon it. Let's go ahead and adopt these Senate changes. If, however, I look at the bill and I say, I don't like what they did for various reasons, let's take some time to look at this and make some other changes. So I reject the Senate amendments. It then goes into a conference committee.
Between the Senate folks and the House folks?
That's correct. Now, it's unlike the first two committees we talked about. In the first two committees, the House and Senate committee, it's a public hearing. The public is invited to participate and give public input and feedback into what's being proposed. In a conference committee, there's no public input. The House,
Interesting.
3 House members and 3 Senate members come together to form a committee.
And where do those members come from? Their respective committees?
Selected by the chairman, the president of the Senate, and the Speaker of the House.
So not even of the committees who contemplated the bill?
It should be, by rule, one of the chairmen of one of those committees. But that's a rule that the Speaker of the House or the President of the Senate can decide to go around and do whatever he or she, in this case 2 men, want to do for that. So they appoint this committee. The committee gets together and they decide what this bill should now look like.
With no input from the ones who did it initially?
That's correct.
And with no input from the public?
No input from the public.
So it could turn out completely different than what was intended in the beginning?
And sometimes does. We've had bills that come out of conference committee that go in as one thing, and one of them came out as a drive-in daiquiri bill.
So it's hijacked?
It's hijacked. In committee, it's hijacked.
And the reason for them to do that is because that way they avoid having to go through the whole committee process?
Or they went through the committee process and it got voted down. So they hijack another bill, and a lot of times what happens in conference committee reports, now imagine you got 3,000 bills that have been filed. The large percentage of them have made it through the process, and on the last 2 days they start coming through conference committee. So you've got bills coming in.
No way you can keep up with it all.
It's very, very difficult, even with computers, to be able to keep up with the changes, much less just the number of bills. So what happens a lot of times is you vote on the final bill, somewhere in there they snuck one sentence in, they did something a little bit different, and you didn't catch it. You end up voting for something and there was no public awareness of it. So we put a bill through, we put a resolution through this session to say, look, why don't we take the time and let's go into a public hearing on these committee reports. It's a committee.
Makes sense.
Let's have a little sunshine on this so everybody really has a time to think about it, public input of what we're doing, and yeah, it does make sense. And at the same time, that vehicle can be used for good. Just as it can be used for bad things to happen, it can be used for good. For example, we had a bill where the state police, we tried to increase the number of troopers on our roads.
Obviously needed.
Obviously needed. I mean, if we learned anything from Katrina, and Rita, one of the things we learned was that we don't have enough troopers in position to take care of really bad things that happen on a catastrophic basis across our state. And if it's even more localized.
Well, look at I-12 and the deaths there.
We don't have enough troopers on the road. So I put a bill through to increase the number of troopers based on a national report that was done that said you need to have 1 trooper on the roads per 3,000 residents. So I put a bill through. Went through the House committee, did fine. Went through the House, did great. Went to the Senate committee, did wonderful. On its way to the Senate floor, it got rerouted into another committee.
How does that happen?
Power of the President of the Senate. So it went to another committee where they killed it. And that was it. So it never made it to the Senate floor, even though it was heading there.
Yeah, what's so interesting, it really sounds like a dictatorship, and you're taking away the whole democratic representative component of our government.
It really is difficult under those kind of circumstances. I mean, that was, you know, I've had great bills like we talked about it before, about the Film Institute and building the school and the training institute here in Baton Rouge.
Yeah.
That got vetoed. It went through 5 different committees before I could ever even get it, and once it passed it, it finally got vetoed. So you can have the powers to be route you through so many different committees until finally one of the committees ultimately kills you. So in that particular case on the state police bill, we looked at it and said, you know what, it's too good. It's too good of a bill. We need to have more troopers.
Television has evolved to the sensational. Cox Digital Cable is high touch with an interactive program guide anyone can use. Cox Digital is tasteful with sophisticated programming choices that stimulate, educate, and make you feel great. Cox Digital is sight and sound extraordinaire, especially on an HD set. Eye-popping clarity and 5.1 surround sound. Cox Digital lets you smell. Well, we're working on it. Experience the digital evolution with Cox Digital Cable, television for the senses.
Welcome back to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith. Again, pleased to have on the show Gary Beard. He's a representative for our state. Gary, legislature's meeting, you were kind of talking about frankly to me, it sounds like the most frustrating job you can possibly have.
It's difficult. It's difficult, and I don't think most people realize for the limited amount of pay that you get to offset the expenses and the loss of time that you have with your family and the loss of time you have with your business, it's a very, if you take it seriously and you try to do a good job, it's very difficult. And
genuine sacrifice, isn't it? It
is, and it can be very frustrating. Very frustrating.
It sounds like it. I'm still baffled by how it sounds like it's a dictatorial process instead of a democratic representative
Louisiana
process.
has a very strong governor. And because of that, the governor really does tend to control a lot that goes through. Now, sometimes you're able to buck the system, if you will, and be able to get some good things through, and sometimes you're not. We had a bill for stem cell research. We created a special committee by an act of House resolution to create a committee on stem cell research, cellular regenerative technologies. We formed a committee because we know we'd had the big argument on cloning to stop human cloning in Louisiana.
I remember.
The House of Representatives always passed the ban on human cloning. The President of the Senate always wanted to allow human cloning. So we had this big battle. Every time we'd pass it in the House, he'd put it into a committee that it would never come out of. It dies. So we said, look, what can we come to an agreement on? We know we need research. We know we need these things. What can we come to an agreement on? So we formed a new committee. I chaired the committee. We went to Pennington, we went to LSU and Tulane, and we discovered phenomenal technologies that are here, unknown to us, to the average person on the street. It's not known.
So we can support them.
Oh, absolutely. There's a technology that exists right now. A man that came to Louisiana is now at LSU, and he has built cellular regenerative towers at LSU. He can take any cell in your body and regenerate it exponentially and give it back to you. Phenomenal technology that exists.
It's hard for me to even comprehend all that.
It's amazing. Developed as part of one of the NASA programs. And it's just an absolutely phenomenal technology. And it's here in Louisiana. But he's not getting enough support.
So he's going to leave.
They've got some great options to leave from the Carolinas to move back up to the Carolinas. So I said, look, why don't we put together a committee and we'll go study these things and see what we can do. So committees did that. We came back and we said, let's do this. Let's take some of the excess monies that we have and let's dedicate it to cellular research, to stem cell research, legitimate stem cell research, non-embryonic, that everybody can agree to. Won't have anything to do with cloning or embryonics. It'll be legitimate,
strictly that.
moral,
everybody signs
ethical,
off on it.
that everybody can sign off on. And it's only $25 million. It's very small, but what it will do was those research scientists in our country that are trying to get federal grants, let's say $100,000 to $150,000 to do research, you can take the top tier of the best scientists in our country that are waiting years to get federal money.
And get them here.
Get them here. Give them $150,000, they stay here. And once it's perfected, give them some money to build the laboratory that they need to go on, and we have now captured the best and the brightest of the technologies and the people that would come to Louisiana.
Didn't happen?
Well, it never made it out of committee. It never even got a hearing. So on the floor of the House, I amended one of the bills to put it on one of the existing research bills, and I tagged it onto it. It went back, and now it's in committee. The problem is I'm not on the committee that's making that determination, so I have to sit back and wait as to whether or not that committee silently is going to accept or reject
we were
research.
talking about the power of the governor, and I mean, it's interesting because currently Governor Blanco, has the power of appointment, and I guess what she wants goes all the way down the line, and we're talking about the power of the chairman of the committees, and then in addition to that, she's got the power of the line-item veto. That's unbelievable.
Well, I'm afraid that although we're on, as of this point in time, we're on lunch break from the session, when we go back in, we'll have another 6 hours to finish the job, send to the governor a host of bills, and I'm sad to say, I think as a whole, we have allowed the administration to grow the size of government.
Let's explain that. We talked about this, that we've had the largest budget this year in the history of our state. How much?
Almost 30 billion. That's billion with a B.
Right, billion with a B.
Yeah. It's an amazing amount of money, and we have now spent it all.
And it went to what?
It's amazing the things that you went to. In fact, if you looked at the budget, you probably would have a hard time really finding out specific items that it went to, because what happens is it's grouped into big buckets of money that you take a long time to go through and find out every one of the little pieces and parts of the budget to what that dollar is associated with. So you may have a line item on a budget that's 200, 300 million, and that's it. You got to go try to find the breakdowns on those
See where it
particular
went.
ones, see where it went. But then you'll have also things like social clubs that receive money in the budget.
Unbelievable.
And that's not the purpose of government.
No, it's not.
And so what has happened is through the expenditure of funds, we have grown government, increased the number of government jobs, whereas many of us there fought against it. Now, I'm not saying it's all bad. There were specific projects that all of us wanted. We wanted to take excess revenues and we wanted to be able to spend it on major construction projects. For example, widening I-12 from O'Neill to Walker to
Right.
eliminate this death trap that we
Right.
have.
Has to be done.
It has to be done. We've got that put in. So there's some major projects here in Baton Rouge and throughout the state that are critical, and we wanted those to be passed. We want to give our teachers a pay raise. We want to give our firefighters and our policemen pay raises. But what we didn't want to do is just spend money
And give everybody else a raise.
on things that are not necessary, social groups and things of that sort that are not critical to the state of Louisiana, and not increasing the size of our government. But that's what we ended up doing. So although there were some good things done, our preference would have been spend the money on highways, on coastal protection, and on debt. Pay off our unaccrued liability. Pay those things down, make it a better place for Louisiana for the future. But what we've done, in fact, is probably strap the next administration coming in with a huge rising cost of government. It's going to take a lot of work, I think, for the next administration to dig out of this hole that's been dug.
Well, let's talk about what so far, because it's still got to be passed, and then it's subject to the governor striking it with the line item veto. Well, let's talk about what good things you see, at least currently pending, that have a shot.
Well, I think that the stuff that's gone through so far, like I said, the pay raises for our teachers, well-deserved and necessary. For our firefighters and for our police, great. We need those things. A lot of money's been spent on higher education. That's critical.
Right.
And that's good. And we did spend, I think at the current time, about $600 million on our roads. It's not as much as we needed.
But at least it's a start.
It's a start. Unfortunately, you don't want to grow the government. I think we're now somewhere in the neighborhood of 4th nationally in spending per capita for Louisiana.
So we spend more money per person in this state via the government
than 46 other states.
Unbelievable.
And,
we're what? Usually 49 or 50 ranked.
Right, but now we're, according to the last number I saw, was about 4th. Here's the thing. You want to spend money like New York? Wonderful. Expect the results in New York. But what we end up doing is spending money like New York and getting the results like Mississippi, because our system isn't right.
Well, and you better be able to generate that money. And I'm going, a lot of this money came from the federal government. That's my perception.
A lot of money came from the feds. A lot of it's coming from the taxation from the Stelly plan that was initiated years ago. So what you find is that we've got all this excess money. It's more money than the state needed. We should have given it back. That's what we were trying to do. In fact, that's what we're doing right now as we go on.
All right, let's talk about the Stelly plan and the other things that are going on right now in the legislature. This is Locke Meredith, Legal Lines. Representative Gary Beard will be right back.
Cox Communications is homegrown with local programming for you. Whether it's local sports, local arts and education, local news and weather, local faith and worship, or local stations with the best in entertainment, Cox Communications brings it all home to you. It's homegrown programming with roots. Only on cable. Only on Cox.
Welcome back to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith. Again, pleased to have on the show Gary Beard. He's a state representative. Legislature's meeting right now, so again, thanks, Gary, for coming in.
Pleasure.
Let's talk about bills that you authored that passed that you're really proud of.
Well, we did some great things from the standpoint of trying to put some bills through to amend the budget process. Of course, this year I was so glad to see over 20 other members of the House join me in voting against the budget.
I think last time you said it was 2?
It was 2 of us that voted against the budget last time, and they voted. And it was too high last time as far as I was concerned, so I was going to vote no this time. But I tell you, I guess from a standpoint of social issues, I think the most important thing that we passed were 2 bills. One was the fetal pain bill, and the second was the partial birth abortion bill.
Okay, let's talk about the partial birth first.
Right. Well, as you know, the U.S. federal Congress had passed a partial birth abortion ban. It's a specific procedure that was actually banned. This is the first time in our history that the government actually passed a ban on a procedure rather than just trying to regulate something.
And it's been upheld by the United States Supreme Court.
That bill was upheld by the Supremes. So now what we find is that, all right, several years ago we passed a bill in Louisiana to ban the procedure. They took that to the federal courts and it was thrown out. So this time, as soon as the U.S. Supreme Court ruled favorably, I called the House staff and I said, let's draft up a bill for Louisiana that would duplicate federal law and put it into the state statute. Now, many people say, why in the world would you want to do that? Why not just let the federal law be the federal law and go on with life?
Don't wait on the feds.
If you try to wait for somebody who's appointed as Attorney General.
Talk about politics.
There's a tremendous amount of politics. Let's take the politics out of it. Let's let our local law enforcement groups handle Louisiana law for Louisianians. So we put a law into place that gave both the federal penalty and then put in a penalty into civil code to allow this procedure to come to a screeching halt.
And the penalties are both criminal and civilly against the doc who would perform the procedure.
That's correct. It doesn't do anything naturally to the mother because the mother in most cases, and certainly in almost all cases, is the second victim in this type of procedure. But the procedure is very specific in federal law. It effectively kills an infant that's only inches from being fully birthed. So they birth the entire baby except the head. The head remains in the mother, and what they do to affect death is now this is while the baby is now moving, they actually stick scissors in the back of the head, open it, and suck out the brains.
It's all unbelievable.
Yeah, it's a horrible, horrible crime that was being perpetrated on partially birthed babies.